All right, who's recording?
Okay. So, um, my name is Therese Nelson, and I run a website called Black Culinary History. And I'm so excited to have the time to talk with Dr. Howard Conyers and to really sort of deep dive into his origin story, certainly what that story meant to his education, his life story, and certainly the work he does now. So, thank you so much, Dr. Conyers, for taking time today and let's have this really hopefully dope conversation.
Therese, I really appreciate it. Like, honestly, like, you're one of the best people, best moderators, I think, in the industry. So, like, for me to take the time to do this, it's really my pleasure. But, like, I'm just fortunate to have you to be able to do this interview. So,
I appreciate that. And we have we have many conversations. I think the food world and sort of the community we built, we often have really amazing conversations that are in silos. So this is really a good opportunity to put one of those conversations out in public and sort of get all those burning questions that I don't think people really ask you a ton about that I find super fascinating. Um, so I really want to start. I mean, honestly, it's sort of trite, but I really want to start at the beginning because you talk a lot about South Carolina and your work in whole hog barbecue, but it really is a very particular and specific place in the country. And so I wonder if you could just sort of take us back and take us to from where you are from, what the town is, what it's like, what that feeling is.
um, I'm from a little town called Paxville, actually Home Branch, South Carolina. Paxville is about 7 miles from Manning, South Carolina, right off Interstate I-95. Just to help
Mm-hmm.
people put it in perspective, it's about an hour away from Columbia, about an hour and a half away from Charleston. The Slaughter is it's in a band of the state that I would like to I want people to extend the definition of Gullah Geechee culture to about the Orangeburg line and go east. And it's in that territory, kind of on the edge of the PD, Low Country, the intersection of that region. The two historical crops in that area was, for my parents' generation, was cotton. My grandfather was a cotton farmer in that particular community. So if you know anything about Black culture, a lot of Black folks pick cotton by hand. And then another part of the state that my mom is from Nichols, South Carolina, which is located in Marion County, and that is very much a tobacco country.
Yes.
They pick tobacco by hand too. So that's just kind of a little bit about like where I'm from. So I grew up in the agricultural, on a little small family farm that my granddaddy purchased. He also farmed other people's land as well. They kind of put it in perspective. They wasn't growing cotton as a kid, but they were growing corn, wheat, soybeans in the community. Those were the general three cash crops. Growing up, that you see in most of the fields, it's actually reverting back to cotton today, which is surprisingly. So the nuances of that, the number of people needed to employ to farm those crops has definitely diminished these days, because the manual labor is kind of almost non-existent with the technology of tractors.
Right.
So
Right.
that's kind of where I'm from. And where I'm actually from is in Clarendon County. I grew up in a community, probably Paxville. So just so y'all can understand a sense of place, a lot of churches in the South formed right after emancipation in like organized structures that plantation owners gave to their recently emancipated slaves. The church I grew up is called Mount Zero Missionary Baptist Church, and my family been in that church since slavery ended. So I know some people don't believe in church, but I'm gonna tell you, if you really want to understand history in the South,
Yes.
when you're trying to find your family roots, if you never hear
Those
anything
church
else from me,
records.
you need to go to the church in the communities, because each church has a series of families, and they're old families, and they're even if they split off, the churches are the root of their families. And the other place that people are doing genealogy is like, it's kind of off topic, but go to the funeral home. The Black funeral homes, a lot of
Right.
times they're old. They've been in the community for years, and Black people generally only send their deceased loved ones to like one or two places. So I would say, like, if your family move away from the North, Therese, or anybody who listens to this from away from the North, if you're trying to find your roots, start with trying to find a church, and that will give you a lot about your family.
Absolutely. One of the things and one of the main reasons I wanted to just start there was because I think sometimes we, especially in this work of historical memory and historical research, we discount resources because they don't maybe look a certain way, they don't fit within a particular academic structure. And so there are all kinds of jewels, these like hidden gems of like really rich, really specific resources that we just discount because we don't really think about it. And I mean, to your point, the church records, I mean, I think about some place like Whitney Plantation, where a lot of those records are, the reason that Whitney is so well researched is because they pick those sort of obscure spaces that had these immaculate records. So it's a really interesting starting point. So I'm interested in Manning and Paxville and just this sort of specificity of place because I'm wondering about what that does to your upbringing, right? Like you grew up in a place that is so particularly agricultural. I think I've heard you cite sometimes when we think about desegregation in the South, we think of Brown versus Board of Education, but you talk about a story that was really closer to your home that precedes it, and this sort of notion of some really particular community-based agency that we don't necessarily think about when we think about more rural parts of the South. And you sort of bequeath this really particular like civil rights like origin story that has to have informed how your parents engage your upbringing.
Yeah, so I guess we'll take a little brief history tour first before we even get into the education thing.
Yeah.
So especially now in the middle where we are currently with this protesting George Floyd, I grew up in Clarendon County. There was a case in like 1944. George Stinney was actually on trial. He was the youngest African American to be executed at age 14. The trial lasted less than 10 minutes.
Right.
For actually being accused of murdering two white girls, if I'm not mistaken. So you young black males dying at the hands of law enforcement officials with a trial. I mean, if you go to a modern day trial, jury selection takes more than 10 minutes. So that case was rigged off the top without even looking at anything else. So that kind of, you have those kind of memories, and you have more than just those, but that just one is just like, if people want to look up George Stinney, Stinney. But then when people talk about Brown versus Board of Education, it actually didn't start with Brown versus Board of Education. It started out in these small rural communities. And in my place, Clarendon County, there were two court cases. There was one, Pearson versus Clarendon County, where this black farmer, he wanted to make sure his children and his neighbors' children had a school bus to get to the school district. So when he filed that particular suit, they threw that, he was a landowner. And just so you understand why land is important to me, he wouldn't be able to file that lawsuit if he wasn't a landowner. And because of that, and that's a very important point to note.
Yes.
But he also said that he didn't have anything else to lose. But when he went to file that suit, they threw the case out on a technicality because they said that he filed a suit in a district that he didn't live in, but he owned land in both places. So he was technically a taxpayer in both locations. So they threw that out on a technicality. But then they came back a few years later, and there was a case called Briggs versus Elliott. Briggs versus Elliott was the follow-up of that particular case. Black farmers again, black people, they risked everything they had, and they filed a petition because they wanted, and there was about 20 or so signers. And what was interesting about that particular case, and I encourage you, I'm not going to give you all of everything of that, but that case was later folded up into Brown versus Board of Education.
Gotcha.
Some of the individuals who was tied up in that case, like one of the pastors, J.A. Delane, this particular pastor had, long story short, he had to be moved out of the county at night in a hearse because they were threatening his life. And he was put in a hearse because they think he's dead. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to escape and flee to safety. And so there's a lot of his family left. But the people who was involved in the original petitioners, they fought for something they believe in. And the sad thing about it, people think it was about integration. It really wasn't about integration. I'm going to tell you what those farmers really wanted for. They just really wanted equal resources for their children. They felt as taxpayers, and that is a real fact. That's not no. They would have been we're talking to some of the family members, they would have been totally okay if they got equal resources in the school, inside the school system. And when I talked to my own parents, they used to say, like, when we were sitting in classroom, we always used to get the hand-me-down books from the white schools.
Right.
Not the new books.
Right.
And even though the material is the same, but why is Black people? It's a psychological thing. Why can't we get the new thing and instead of having to get the hand-me-down? And so education was important in that community. But then also on my mom's side of the family, my great grandfather, he founded a school and bought a school bus for his children. So education was one of those things that my family really made of. It was important to me, to my family. They knew that every generation had to get a little further education.
That's right.
And it didn't matter whether or not the educational levels of my grandparents or great-grandparents, they always said that y'all kids don't get an education, and they kind of matriculated into myself. Not necessarily myself wanting to be a PhD in engineering, but my father said that his two boys was gonna get an education. That was a non-negotiable, and the high school wasn't it. There was a college education. It was, and so the engineering thing for me kind of started out because I found a natural knack for math and science, and I think what people fail to realize with growing up in the rural areas around Black farmers and people like that, they're the most resourceful, ingenuity people.
Surrounded by engineers, surrounded by it's all science and math, right? Like.
It's all science and math. And I think they become even better engineers because they had the resources to do some of the things they needed to get done. They knew they had to get the job done, and whatever it took, they were willing to go through the sacrifice to make that happen. And so education, so my love of engineering is more of I had a practical understanding growing up and seeing how to use the different principles. And I didn't know the principles. But then when I got in school, I get to see some of the principles, and I saw how they applied in real life. But the math and science was just like the things that you need to actually operate through.
Yeah. I mean, you made so many good points, and some of it is going to sit with me, and I know we're going to come back to some of it. But I'm wondering about, because one of the points that you made that I'm finding really hitting home is this notion of the power of ownership and the power of land. I find it similar when you go to the Caribbean and you find like this islands like Tortola or some of the less tourist islands where people like to the outside looking in, you would look at sort of you look at these places and maybe not think about the richness and sort of the value of what you're seeing. Like there's a agency to own what you have, and so much of the narratives that we find in children migration is that we're constantly trying to reclaim or sort of find those sort of touchstones of agency. And a lot of reasons why folks like, your parents grew up not too far from where my grandparents grew up in the same generation. Your parents, my grandparents, age-wise is sort of similar, but like the difference is what you owned, right? Like my grandparents and my family didn't own what they were living on, right? Like, so there is a sense of what are you staying for? When you own what you have, like, of course what do you mean? Where am I going? This is mine. And that sort of
posture. But it was a fight. It was a fight. Yeah. What people don't understand, like once my grandfather on my father's side, he had to buy his land twice. I mean, so like imagine you paying for stuff and you got to pay for it twice. It's just crazy to think about. Like, but it makes you understand the value of like land ownership. Because this man is really, he didn't have a college education, he didn't have a high school. Maybe I think this particular grandfather probably had a third grade education at best. But to pay for land twice is something it's asinine. Black people should never have to do that. I mean, like paying for it once is one thing, but paying for it twice,
insane.
Yeah. So, and you couldn't argue. They couldn't argue about it. So let me make sure I make this point. Even though he paid for it, he couldn't go back and tell the man he didn't pay for it because he might would have ended up on a tree hanged.
Right. The very real stakes. I mean, I think, again, like the point you made earlier about how we think about and contextualize history, it's like there's not, maybe romanticize is the wrong word, but I think we put footnotes of very like sort of clear and like polished narratives around these times when they were really complicated and really sort of multi-layered experiences. Like that agency comes with a kind of exhaustion and a kind of constant fight, and you have to kind of account for that when you're thinking about why people did or didn't leave. That's so dope. Because it just, I don't know, something about that is it had to have informed how you move as a young man, like moving out of. So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I mean, it definitely makes an impact on me. Like, and ownership is important. Like one of the things, when I got to move to New Orleans after I finished school. Like, I knew I had to buy something, and I wanted to buy in the community, but it kind of led to the same thing. Like, I had to buy something, try to make an investment, try to make it make sense. But then when I think land ownership playing key for me, like I'll say you all witnessed it, how valuable it was when I got ready to do the event Gumbo Jubilee. Mm-hmm. Wow, everything wasn't what it could have been for, not the experience, but like if I didn't have the land, the backyard, another empty lot, would I be able to pull off Gumbo Jubilee? Because the place where I had it at didn't have a kitchen, so I start like the room had an extra room. I could clean some stuff out, make that into a makeshift kitchen. I could make the yard. When the truck was finished with the cow, I could have put that on the empty lot. And so I was able to do things because I owned those spaces. But if I didn't own those spaces, I don't know if I could have made that happen. It would have been really hard. And so Gumbo Jubilee, some of the things like ownership, and every time ownership, it allows you to pivot. If you own the infrastructure, you could pivot at any given time. And I think that's what people don't realize sometimes, how you can pivot and things you can do. And that's the reason it's important to me. In infrastructure development, that's where the value of the land comes from. Or you got to make the land do something for you, whether it's putting up apartments, that makes the land more valuable, that could generate revenue, or you putting in corn or wheat or soybeans, and hopefully you could grow that and create a value-add product using that. But the land is producing something, not just sitting fallow.
Absolutely. So I really want you to talk a little bit about college, because you just explained, like, it was never an option not to go to college for you. And so engineering becomes a part of a thought process around what you wanted to do with your life, but you picked your college. I want to know what went into that process, because it seems like really fortuitous that you ended up where you did, and that sort of that process of what you experienced during your college years. It seems to really be infused into a lot of how you move through your adult life.
So when I went to college, I went to North Carolina A&T State University. That wasn't necessarily my first college, but that's the college that gave me the most money. I actually got a USDA 1890 scholarship, and it was a full ride. And it allowed me to combine the fields of agriculture and engineering together and studying bioenvironmental engineering. And my parents basically told me, like, when I got the scholarship, you go in there because you got a full one. And they said, they gave me the statement, a bird in the hand is better than a bird in the bush. And so I was contemplating between going to Clemson University, but going to A&T was the best decision. When I got to A&T, I wasn't sure, Therese, honestly, if I was going to make it. I didn't know, because I'm competing against students from large cities, Atlanta, Georgia, DC, Chicago, and sitting in the classroom, I didn't know, did I have the ability? But I put in the hard work. I mean, I would study every day of the week to make up for any deficiencies. Yeah. And eventually I ended up graduating at the top of my class at A&T. I graduated with a 4.0 GPA. Mm-hmm. I don't talk about that a lot.
No, but there's something, I wanted you to talk about it, because I think sometimes there's a sense sometimes that we aren't clear about what tools are in our toolbox for real. What tools that matter are in our toolbox. Something about the way you brought up, talking to your parents, like, there's no question that the tenacity, the legacy, and the sort of specificity from where you come all help in that particular toolbox that you maybe wouldn't have had if you hadn't grown up where you came from. You know what I mean? Like, this, all of it matters. So I just wanted to make sure that we had archive you telling that part of the story, because it's such an important part.
So I mean, that's a very important part. I mean, probably the other part, like, even though I got a 4.0 GPA, people don't realize, like, I was well involved on campus. I mean, I joined this fraternity, Beta Upsilon chapter, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated as a junior. I was on, like, the Engineering Appeals Board. I was actually one of the top engineering student overall for leadership and community service, something called the Naviscar Award. I mean, I would say I did everything. I even partied. I'm not gonna lie, party with people. Sometimes some of my promoters.
Experience. You wrung every bit of what you need to get from that experience out of it. Like, it's no wasted moment. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, some of the party promoters I knew, and I told them, I'm coming from the library. I might be dressed apart, but they're like, come on in, because we know you. We know what you're doing. We know you ain't causing no trouble. So
that's right.
But I did it. I had a great college experience. I won't trade to going to HBCU as undergrad. It's something very special. A lot of people I met there. It really also let me see how dope Black culture is, from knowing people in DC, like with the go-go music, or people in the New York, New Jersey area. I mean, I used to have a New York, New Jersey club. I mean, like, Black culture is not like one thing, and you really see it at a Black college campus. And you can kind of see how the people associate with each other from their communities, from their towns and cities from across the country. But it was a beautiful thing.
That's right.
Then I went on to Duke University.
Yeah, so I was just saying, because we got to get to graduate school, right?
Yeah, then I went to graduate school. That was a crazy thing. But the reason I went to graduate school, in most HBCUs in the STEM fields, in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, most of the professors are really not African American, so don't get it twisted. Like, you think you're gonna have an African American professor you teach an HBCU if you're going to school at HBCU in those subjects. Most of the time, it was international foreigners. Right. And one of my motivations, I said I want to be able to teach at a HBCU when I retire in life. And don't know if that'll ever happen, but it may not ever happen. If I do it, it's definitely not gonna be for the money, because I definitely can't afford that. But I do it when doing to give back. Yeah. But so I went to Duke University for my master's and PhD in mechanical engineering. I had a really good professor, Dr. Earl Dow, probably the world's best aeroelectrician. And from what I could tell, the industry used to respect them as such. We used to come from around the world to study under somebody like him. And he was a white man. I mean, he wanted to make sure, like, you was thorough. You coming out his lab, you were gonna be good. I mean, he won every major aerospace award you could get. So you couldn't just come out just like, I think I'm gonna wing it a prayer. And so during that time, that was a humbling experience, also, because you're on a campus, and this was a very interesting time when I was on campus at Duke. I think when I was on campus at Duke, I'm pretty sure I was on campus at Duke at this time. So you're a graduate student, and you're around so many elite people. I mean, not elite, like people that got wealth. Their families got long-standing wealth. Washington Duke was a big, in the heart of tobacco country, where they actually value added to making cigarettes. Right. So you're thinking about that part. Well, I wasn't thinking about that at that part of the time, but I think what was the thing that was really pivotal during that part of time, Duke had a lacrosse scandal. And right. And so you see the implications of that particular how the students were protected. If it was a HBCU, I don't know if that same type, I'm positive the same type mentality wouldn't have occurred. Those students would have been in jail. But a little bit of you see the benefits of privilege. Right. I think the other thing I saw while I was in Durham and during that time period was just like the internationalness and the mentality of like Duke had a mentality like you're gonna create jobs. You're not gonna go and be an employer. Gotcha. You're going to be an employee. So that's a whole different mindset when you're sitting around students who like, yeah, my family own this, they own that. Mm-hmm. Even though you're in graduate school, you may not think about it, but you're like, okay, I'm thinking about this. Like this is real. This is definitely a mind shift, and it definitely make you want to think a little different.
Right. So let's talk about John Hope Franklin, because that part of your story is really fascinating. And I think it also, because again, every point in your story is really about that spine straightening, right? That posture with which you enter the world when you do your work from. Something about the specificity of historical context in the midst of your experience in college. I mean, you're talking about all those signals that you're being taught and told about how to engage the world, how you're going to use your degrees, how you're going to, what all of this, what all of it, again, like it's all about toolbox, right? Like you armed with where you come from, you armed with your degrees, you armed with all the tools for work ethic, all, the way you're going to be able to apply your degrees in the marketplace. All these things are sort of percolating, but none of it is tangible yet, right? Like it's all, you're accumulating information. So that's a big part of it, I think.
So being in Durham and having the opportunity to live with John Hope Franklin, probably one of the things, it probably took me 10 years to process.
Yeah.
10 to 15, yeah. Yeah, at least 10 years. I mean, the lessons he was like, that was a very challenging time in my life because you're living or you're learning one of the most hardest fields of engineering in your life and studying fluid structural interaction of an aircraft wing, how it flings deflect during flight, or how skyscrapers sway. They have to sway a little bit so they won't like collapse, or bridges, they'll give a little bit. So you challenging on that side of the brain. Then when you get ready to come home after a long day at graduate school, you got to be reading up on like current events to make sure you tight. I mean, yeah, I had to make sure I was tight to have a conversation. I mean, like, and so you, like, I'm working both sides of my brain. I'm working my side of the brain as an engineer, and I'm working my side of the brain as like understanding humanities. And that, I think that has probably shaped the foundation of a lot of my work. I will say he's probably he was the most humblest individual I ever met, but he also was the hardest working, one of the hardest working individuals I have met. You wouldn't, if you walk up to him, you would, if you didn't know who he was, he wouldn't tell you who he was. He wouldn't be like, oh, I got this prize, I won this prize, I wrote this book, I'm on this board. You just think he's some black man, elderly black man. And by the point that I met him in life, he was an elderly black man. So you wouldn't have known anything about him, but I'm still processing some stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so just for reference, in terms if people don't really understand, I mean, in my opinion, I mean, not really a matter of opinion, but I mean, in the most important ways, I mean, John Hope Franklin is the reason that we have Black studies in the way that we do in academic spaces. He is someone who understood the power and necessity of using the fullness of Black culture as a central research theme.
I would say he was probably the most pivotal figure to define African American history and culture going forward. He was the link between Carter G. Woodson into modern day. You don't have people like Cornell. The historians of the day do not like come even close to him. And I'm not saying that because like some of them, like his work, you can read his work and this stuff is real relevant. Like it's pointed. One time, some people don't realize this man studied one particular individual for 40 years, named George Washington Williams. And George Washington Williams wrote a book on African American history, about 2 volumes. But Dr. John Hope Franklin, he wrote this book for Knopf. I think he was one of the first people to write the book for Knopf, and that's major.
Yes.
And I mean, the book From Slavery to Freedom changed the game.
Yes.
It's probably the most cited book ever. Could have been thicker. It probably could. He got a book called Racial Equality in America. It almost needs to be reprinted because it's still relevant for today.
That's right.
One of the conversations I had with him, and because I grew up in Clarendon County, we talked about Brown versus Board of Education, and I had a conversation with him. He said, I wrote the legal defense, the historical defense for that case. And I'm just like, and we were here talking about it, and he's just like, he knew it. I mean, he knew it well. He knew it better than me. And I like, but you kind of like, it kind of shifts how I do certain things because
once you arm with history and once you arm with facts, you can't be checked. There's again, like that posture change, right? Like you are wrapped up in, you have these tools, these weapons to move and navigate in a way that you can't be checked. How are you gonna? You can't. John Hope Franklin teaching you Black history. How can you not be armed?
I mean.
Yeah.
I don't know how much history he taught me, but I will tell you the conversations we had, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I really don't know how much history he taught me at the time. Yeah, he taught me a lot, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But my mythology.
Yeah.
My mythology, how I approach in the world, how I move, humility, graciousness.
Yes.
Think about like what people don't realize. His father wrote wrote an account of the Tulsa race riots. So like Dr. John Hope Franklin's father was one of the attorneys there. So it's like you touching, like this man writing history, his father in the middle of history, and you're just like, yo, geez, like, and it's real. I mean, I don't know. I mean, and so I take that kind of level of research that I learned as an academic, as well as from Dr. Franklin, and then when I start digging into this barbecue, and yeah, I was very much a practitioner. Did I know how deep it was? No, but I knew when I started digging into the history of it, I do it in a way. If anybody want to ever check me, the person who I was grading my standard against, there is nobody in the country I was grading my standard against. I was grading my standard of what Dr. John Hope Franklin would have told me, what would be, were you pleased with the results that I put out?
That's right.
And then Dr. Earl Dow, from what he would have said, like, did your experimentation and your theoretical match up with what you saw in the field? So I took that kind of posture and actually understand it. Plus, I'm deeply rooted into that tradition of barbecue. And so I take it really passionately now. It wasn't something that was forced on me. It was something I learned at an early age.
Yeah.
I just love being around the fire. I mean, that was kind of the thing, just being around the fire.
So, okay, because this is where I'm feeling like the real meat. I mean, already this has been so fascinating, but so to my mind, this like sort of linked chain of events that led you to the way in which we all engage your work now. And so I'm wondering, because I mean, during your college years, during all this engineering training, certainly the early parts of your professional life as an engineer, going home or sort of connection to home, I'm wondering how much of that you were feeling. I mean, because you talk about how, whole hog barbecue is every event where you from. It's in every, there's no memory that you have that's about celebration, about community, or about connectivity that doesn't have a hog. And so I'm wondering,
if it was significant.
Yeah, right. And so you talk about moving to New Orleans, this life that you had there, in a lot of ways it feels like the reclamation of those memories, or sort of that practice, it was intentional because you were trying to reconnect to home. And maybe I'm overstating, but that's what it feels like.
I mean, it is. I mean, the quickest way to go home if you can't get there is through food. And it's just the same thing as our enslaved ancestors. They couldn't go back to Africa, but they could reconnect through their tongue. And they found peace and comfort in that. Just that, maybe to take the food that they were familiar with in Africa, and while they maybe didn't have every ingredient, they made it what it is to kind of get as close to home as possible. Yeah, I could go back to South Carolina, but I think like if I had lived in any other place besides New Orleans, I wouldn't have took it so seriously, because New Orleans is a very food specific city,
right?
And it wasn't in South Carolina, so you see the food, but you see the culture, like the Black Mexican Indian culture. You see the second lines come by your house. Even when I used to get up early for work, sometimes during the like Mardi Gras time of the year, I would hear the Indians drumming during their practice. And so like I'm hearing some chickens in the background sometimes, but no, you hear actual drumming for the Indians practice. And that's pretty special. I don't hear it as much anymore, but that right there made me think about, like, that culture is old. And as I learned how old it was, it made me think about how old the culture I was growing into.
That's right.
And I think when I gave a lecture at Dillard, it really kind of sunk home. And all around the same time, Fox News put a story about influential pit masters. There was several rebuttals. And I looked at the barbecue pits of those rebuttals. And the animals look identical to how we would lay them out on a pit.
Right.
But I think the really defining thing was when I got ready to give a lecture at Dillard University, we didn't take no pictures of this process growing up, which is sad to say that we didn't take any pictures of whole hog cooking from the time I was 3 or 4 years old till 2006. So that's probably about 25 years of cooking that we ain't take any pictures. I don't have any whole hog barbecue pictures from that time period.
Wow.
Yeah, we had cameras. We had Polaroid cameras. We had 110 cameras. And so, I asked my father to draw a sketch of his barbecue pit that he cooked in the ground with. And when I saw that sketch and I saw how it looked on the ground, it looked identical to those plantation era pictures. I mean, almost verbatim.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about the barbecue sauces in my region, in my community. They had a vinegar pepper-based barbecue sauce on one half of the county. And I was like, that's it. There's nothing different.
Right.
And so I knew I had to get, like, if I was going to start doing this thing, if I was going to help correct the narrative, I had to go through the trouble of really understanding and dig deep and not believe everything that was told to me at a given time. So I didn't believe, I took some of the stuff as truth, but I read so much because I wanted to verify everything. And if I couldn't back it up with oral history, most of the stuff I could back up with oral history, but then some stuff go further back, I couldn't. But I had to trust the process. And so that kind of led me down the process to start cooking in the ground so I could have that experience, so I could understand firsthand what that was, what it meant. Because my father, all I could always hear growing up was, my father said, when you cook in above ground pits on cinder block pits or fuel pits, those pits was in the ground, and everything I taught you was using those same processes. So when I went to do it again for the first time, and without him, well, that was the first time I did it, and that wasn't without him. He said, everything you know started down in the ground, so all you got to do is think about it in the ground. But that is a hard process.
Right.
For the first time, that takes a lot of guts. And I did it for an event, which is crazy. I probably shouldn't have did it for an event. I probably should have did it in practice, but I trust the process.
Yeah. Yeah. So so when was that? What year are we talking about? When it really sort of becomes important to you to sort of start to not just the research process, but sort of you making these connections about how to tie research to practical knowledge in a way that is starting to record and starting to sort of link these ties, like sort of dots, in a way that's starting to become organized.
Probably about 2015, somewhere in that time frame.
Right.
But also what people don't realize, like for me being an engineer, like I live in a very Hidden Figures is a real thing. I'm gonna leave it like that. Hidden Figures, that movie, while it was in the 60s and 70s, don't think that movie is still not relevant in the STEM fields. And for me, cooking a hog was therapeutic.
Yes.
Just shoveling the coals and hearing those the grease drop and seeing the people's reaction, that was sort of therapeutic for me.
Right.
But that was kind of the moment where I kind of started taking it serious. I started reading the books, and I read the books, and I read a lot of historical literature, and the books had gaps. And I said, I know those gaps.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I was like I'm being arrogant, like I know those gaps. I fundamentally, I've seen those gaps firsthand.
Yep. Because I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, because there's something about the way you do your work and the way you think about this culture. It's similar to when we're thinking about our Black history in any space, right? Any context. So much of it is not just intuition, but it's lived experience. And because we have those gaps that folks who are outside the culture can't necessarily fill in, there's always going to be gaps in narrative, right? If we don't do the work of making sure we fill in those gaps with, to your point, if it looks like oral history, if it looks like recreating what we can infer from other disciplines, it all has to add to it. It's like these layers of context that sort of, or the puzzle pieces that all of a sudden start to give you a fuller, more sort of direct narrative. I'm interested in how you've sort of translated it into media presence, because so much of what you do, you talk about your life as this far off life as an educator, but I feel like what you do really is education. It really is sort of centered in sort of teaching us in a way that is tangible and not so, and then it sort of breaks forms. Part of it was certainly your Nourish program, but all of it also is like your website, your writing, just your presence in food spaces that aren't traditionally thinking about like mainstream food spaces is important. I feel like that your presence in those spaces helps to shine a light in a way that's antiseptic, right? It sort of it cleans out a lot of foolishness and a lot of narratives that are confusing or aren't really naming the thing. So much of what you do is clarity. And so I'm thinking about that when that pivot into media became important to you, because I think that that narrative you also talked about in terms of ownership has become really interesting in terms of the way you're engaging your media practice, right? Like this idea about owning narrative, not just place, right? Like owning land is important, but also owning your own voice and your own narratives is really important. So you become this really beautiful storyteller, but it's also evolves really quickly. So I'm wondering about that process.
Yeah, I think like becoming a storyteller, I think that storytelling is just in our culture by just, and I think that's just something that always happened. One time I used to always try to be on the receiving end of storytelling. And it was in a very informal setting though. Whether it was sitting around with my father or my mother while baking cakes, or driving the tractor, going to the store and going to eat at this place called Sunny Mark with my grandfather in Nichols. So storytelling was always sitting under the tree with my uncle and my grandfather at Esso store. So storytelling was kind of like I was always on the receiving end of it. So like for me to be the narrator, it kind of flips full circle. But doing with PBS, I learned fairly quickly the power of media. And well, one, I didn't know what I wasn't doing. I didn't have no clue about what I was doing. So I'm like, what I got to lose?
Right.
But once I got into the whole media space, I said, I have an opportunity to really share a message with people a lot farther than I could ever go. And it's amplified and it's scalable. But also I have a way to touch young people in a way to probably inspire them to say, like, while I'm talking about food, you suddenly knowing that this black man from the rural South who whatever can work his way up to being a rocket scientist, testing rocket engines, developing technology. And so if he can do it, I should be able to do it too. I won't say you can do it, but if you put in the work and it's not gonna be given to you.
But just the possibility, right? That optic of possibility.
It's a possibility.
I think sometimes we discount what people. I mean, I grew up in North New Jersey, and it was very much a similar situation where, I mean, you are being told very subtly what the limits of your possibilities are, and it's needing to see, not just, but certainly outside your family, but needing to see in media and the spaces that you enter into, that you see people who look like you, who are doing things that you couldn't have even imagined. And it may not, like you said, it may be the thing that they do, but it's just the mobility of it, right? Like
yeah, I mean, some things I have done, my parents, they could probably never fathom. I mean, honestly, being on TV for Man Fire Food, that was my first time in media, publicly, like outside of print media and podcasts. Yeah. And being on Man Fire Food and seeing how that snowballed and how the community got all excited about that back home, because I wasn't even there, but like my aunt told me, she said she got some vegetables from this local farmer, and the farmer said, that's your nephew on TV, so I'm gonna give you all these vegetables. I still kind of upset my aunt. I'm looking at the phone, the pictures come through on the phone, like, you got a trunk load of vegetables. What I get to dig a hole on TV and talk about something and do something, but you get a real reward. But that when I realized the power of media, power of like the influence it has to shape minds and give people a different perception. So like through barbecue, that's where I kind of realized through barbecue I have a real vehicle to incite change in a positive manner. It's deeper than just that whole barbecue hog. But the hog is very significant, or whatever animal it is, or whatever protein, or whatever sweet potato I cook, or whatever it may be. Food has a very magical power, and it has a place in the South. And I only talk about the South because I never lived anyplace else. But I know.
It's a real particular. The specificity is important as well. I think that what your work does as well is it sort of charges everybody else around the country who's doing this work in earnest to really start to think about their stories and their points of origin, right? Like it doesn't invalidate anyone else's story or their part of the puzzle, but just ask you to be specific about what you're talking about.
And I think that's a good point, Therese. I think like the reason I focus so much on the South, because I feel like the people in those other areas who live there, they could tell stories that I would have no clue, but I would love to hear, and they could tell it from a lived experience of what it's like.
Right.
But like the influence, the inspire people, the narrative, controlling the narrative became really important because I realized that looking across the food landscape, we wasn't given the opportunity to share our story. So with Nourish, I worked really hard to put what I want to see in the world and still try to fit within the confines of mainstream. I possibly could have got by and had a 100% black show, but I didn't know if that would actually work. I mean, that wasn't my show, that wasn't my money, but like if I had all black people on that show, I wanted something. I wanted the indigenous people, but I couldn't get the indigenous people to communicate, to respond to emails, and that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But getting people to come onto camera is an art, and you also have to have an art of, as a host, is how to relate to those people, and they got to make sure they trust you. And
yes.
It's a level of trust I gained with a lot of people I had. But I think the big thing for me, like I want to do it again. I want to own what I can. I'm going through something now that I can't even own it. But that's just the nature of the beast of how powerful media is. Like, especially when you start dealing with major networks. I mean, it's for profit when you're dealing with major players. Right. There are certain rules that you got to either you're gonna play it by or you're not. It's almost like you're in the big leagues.
Yeah. But I think also some of the things that I think are interesting, and again, one of the reasons why I wanted so specifically to make sure we crafted a linear narrative around your makeup, is because part of that compromise, if you call it a compromise, when you're dealing with telling stories in larger platforms, is really about sort of how you come to the table, right? There's a trust level I think that people feel with you. Because they know from where you're coming, right? Like they know that your heart, your mind, your research process, the stories that you choose to tell are coming from a place that is fully authentic, and you're going to do right by the stories, right? So it's this sort of, you point about barbecue as well. I want us to sort of end on a sort of, because we're getting close to, I want to be respectful of your time, but a big part of, I think, how a lot of us have engaged your work in the last sort of 5 to 6 years has certainly been from the lens of you translating culture that we maybe don't have in our everyday, from a place we're not necessarily from. We think about Blackness as this kind of cultural umbrella, but the stories you're telling us really come from places where you can't get these stories in mainstream spaces. One, because people won't tell these stories authentically in those spaces, but also because there's a protectiveness that you feel towards from where you come that translates so clearly with how precious you are about the stories. And so I'm thinking a lot about I want to go to talk a little bit about the Gumbo Jubilee and the process of that and why it was so sort of like emblematic. But I think also when you're talking about this sort of whatever your thought process around how you're entering media currently, it does have a lot to do with your intention, the tools that you have to tell stories that are that need protection and need someone who is a steward of those stories in a way that is going to do
I'm
right,
not gonna
honor it. Yeah.
So I'm not gonna like tell a story. Like if you notice, like nobody has ever been to my home county yet on a public scene. And, like you haven't seen any stories come out about HowardConyers from my hometown or community. They may eventually come out, but when that point come out, either I'm gonna have to know the writer really well, and I'm gonna have to either have some or all editorial control to make sure I know it, not to stifle the writer, but I want to know how my community is being represented on a larger scale. Right. I'm gonna protect that community at all costs, even though people could go around and try to dig, but they're not gonna be able to dig because there's a protectionism in the community and the culture that we're just not gonna just give up information. I mean, you might could buy the information, but at that point, it's not real. If you start buying the information to try to figure out what's going on.
Right.
So I'm real protective of that. Like, I want to make sure when I do things, I make sure, like, it's to the highest ability, highest level, because I don't think about just what HowardConyers going to get out the deal. I think about what is the next person going to come in line. So hopefully if I walk through the door and I do well, then the next person have a little bit less, I have an easier time to go through. And I'm showing you like, okay, I'm going to give you results. And because I know that's what people want. They want results. I mean, that's anybody you deal with, you want results. Whether you deal with a bank, they want to know if you'll pay your loan back. Everybody want to know, like, what is my ROI? If I can help make you some money, this is America, this is capitalism. Hey, we all got to make money in this bed. The more money I make, the more money they make. And I don't see it as a problem. I just want to make sure that I get what I'm due, what is equitable. And I want to make sure, like, in some points, as I try to insert different people in different places, I want the team around me to look like that, because that is a very important part of storytelling too. Is when you go into certain communities, they need to reflect the subjects that you're talking to, because that invokes a sense of comfort that it's hard to explain, but the subjects know it.
No, I know what you're saying. I think this is a random tangent, but I was just thinking about, like, sometimes there's a critique of the WPA narratives, because as powerful as they are, right? Like, you have to sort of consider who took those videos, who took those audios, who, what kind of questions were they asking? All those things really sort of become important in terms of the empirical data, right? Like, you can, if you're using this data without that context, then history sort of reframes it in a way that wasn't necessarily accurate. So I don't know, it's wonderful watching the way that you work and research, because the full context of the way in which you engage in subjects is always very clear. So just as raw data, someone else to sort of use and infer, they always have that context.
And also, one thing that this is an unwritten rule, and it may work for some people, but I don't go and try to do a story the first time, especially in my culture. I try to sit down and get to meet the person, get to know that person. And if nothing else, the only thing I may do is say I want to get a picture with that person. So when I come back again, they may forget me, but they could at least say, oh, I got this picture. Remember I was here? So, probably don't remember, but you look at the picture, I was there. You was in it.
It's not just this transactional interaction with somebody. It's like you actually were interested in who I was and what my story was. And the first thing our interaction with is not about you wanting something from me.
Yeah. So I kind of go to a lot of places twice. So some people may only go to a place once. I don't believe it may become a time where I can't go to the places once. But if it's my culture, it's my people, I'm really trying to go in there like.
But don't you think that's kind of like second, third visit? I think the number of visits is certainly critical, but it's also really just more about how respectful you are about the spaces that you enter, right? Like I think sometimes as storytellers, we get so concerned with getting a narrative, and we're not really understanding what the full, because even sometimes I notice there's sometimes, especially in mainstream media, when they engage with our culture, you can tell when a person isn't really fully hearing what they're receiving. As a viewer, you watch like, oh my God, this person you got to spend how much time, we see in a 5-minute interview, clearly you got to spend so much more time with this person, and the subject was so dope, it must have been such a wonderful conversation. But if you aren't really present and don't know what gifts you being given in that moment, it does, I think it colors some of what the end result is. And if you that like two-pronged approach of like really wanting to know and be in community in that way, I'm sure gets you way better and way more interested in a lot more depth to the real interviews that you take. So it's just a really beautiful way of building network and community, and I think it sort of infuses into the way that you sort of do your work now. I mean, the biggest and most shining example of that is your Gumbo Jubilee. I was familiar with sort of the feeling of family reunion from going back home with my grandparents over summers, but for a lot of people, the responses that I heard was sort of, this was some people's first time in a place that was that rooted. And it's rooted. I think that Black people, again, like we always sort of culturally, we think we miss the fact that everybody doesn't have the same sense memories and the same sort of markers of of community or home or sort of heritage in that way. And something about the way you curated that evening, that really the whole weekend was so, I don't know, it was just so indicative. It told me, I think if people didn't have a real reference point or just coming to this event knowing a little bit about you but had never really gotten to spend time with you, it said everything that it needed to say about who you are and how you engage the world. So if you could just talk a little bit about the spirit of it, why you decided to do it, and how it all kind of came together, because I know it was a very long labor of love.
So Gumbo Jubilee came out just kind of a one-time event. I saw a lot of things over the time period since being in kind of like food adjacent to the media mainstream that I didn't like seeing, like going to food festivals. I didn't really see it centered on us. And I didn't call it a festival because I didn't want to get into like ramifications with the city. We're calling it a festival. Like I would one day wouldn't mind seeing Gumbo Jubilee as such a festival. I didn't see for the Tricentennial in New Orleans, they were celebrating the food culture of the city, and with the people who hands to find it were mainly African Americans. I didn't see that, or the Haitian influences in the pot. And finally, Gumbo Jubilee, like for me personally, like I need to kind of close up this barbecue journey for me for as actually being a practitioner or a pit master. I needed an excuse to cook a whole cow, which is
talk about
and
that
so.
I think you talked about how much whole hogs were part of your barbecue practice, but as this research is unfolding, right, like you sort of come into 2015, you starting to think about barbecue culture, it's sort of infused into your research process, you're learning more, you're going through Nourish, you're doing all this work, and then you kind of come around to the whole cow. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the specificity of that, because I feel like in a lot of ways, like it really becomes a centerpiece of the event, and really a centerpiece of like that. I mean, from the engineering of the pitch, all of that stems from this nugget of research you found around the whole cow.
So most of the literature I found in WPA narratives or older barbecue, other like barbecue books, they had mentioned this cow keeps showing up. They'll call it an ox, they'll call it a steer, and or half a cow, half a steer, half a ox, and it just kept showing up more and more again. And I asked my father one day, like, did y'all ever barbecue a cow? And he said, no, I ain't had no recollection of barbecuing a cow, and nobody in my community had recollection of it. And so I knew it was there because the process they described was identical to the hog, and that's how they said in the books. And so I said, well, I started thinking about it, and then I asked my father another question about cows, because my mama's side of the family didn't have a cow, if I'm thinking right. But he said when they had a cow, that cow had a sole purpose to milk. When that cow finished its job being a milking cow, they trade that cow in for another. They sent it to the slaughterhouse and got another one. So most people, black people who had cows, you didn't have a whole lot of cows just laying around because they're very expensive. You have to have a lot of land to cultivate. Unlike a hog, you just have a little pen. And so looking at the journey, and I say, well, cooking a whole cow, it's not an easy thing. And I knew if I cooked the whole cow, that would fill in any blanks from my understanding of cooking American barbecue. I had did every other animal that was domesticated I could possibly do that I would want to do. Cause I'd already did lamb, goats, sheep. Well, sheep is a older lamb, so I wasn't really that impressed by the lamb, but the cow was just that massive animal that was like, I would say, the holy grail of barbecue for the literature. So with cooking that kind of animal, that kind of weight, I knew I couldn't, based on some of the cooking process or the parts of the cooking process that I did find in the literature that was old, I knew I had to be able to turn the cow repeatedly times during the cooking process. And from actually cooking a lamb before, I used to turn it manually. But I didn't want to turn it manually this time. I wanted something that was a little more finesse. And I wanted to show people, like, if you really love this culture, that you build everything you really need. And we built it. My father built it. We designed it. And I want to show you all what engineering and excellence is all about, as well as what resourcefulness is all about with building a barbecue pit that I haven't cooked on since. And that was my first time cooking that event, too, which is crazy, too. That's just bone crazy. But I trust the process. I mean, by the time I did very expensive, I cooked in different locations. I wasn't cooking in the same spot, the same kitchen. So I felt pretty confident overall. I did. I really did feel pretty confident, and I trust the process. A lot of people, people say, "What is the process?" The process is a 400-year process. Why do Howard Conyers change why should I change the process? I didn't make it. All I'm doing is continuing it. I could change it to make it somewhat more a better thing, but for this particular exercise, I need to know this process was tried and true.
That's
and
right.
Me cooking in this manner, I verified that. And if somebody else want to cook it in a manner later, I mean, I know BJ Dennis them did it later. They had a good playbook to follow.
Right.
So, I mean, that was a cow. Then the final thing about Gumbo Jubilee that I was most excited about, that I'm really proud of, is just giving out recognition of people in our industry, because I felt like there were no places where I felt like we was always secondary on the food media side, on food recognition, whether it's JBF or SFA. I just felt that we were secondary, and we always asking them for permission to do certain things. And
Right.
I said, like, no, we don't have to ask for permission for something that represents our culture. And I own that space, and I don't really care about have to beg anybody for anything. If I want to go do something and I work for it, like, I'm gonna do it. And Gumbo Jubilee was me saying, like, we can do this. We just have to think about what we have, how to leverage things in our community,
Yes.
people. It may not look like like mainstream, but it's not supposed to look like mainstream, because what a mainstream, one of the things that really shifts mainstream is our culture, and whether it's music or food. And so Gumbo Jubilee was that celebration of looking at food and music, and I wanted to tie it all together. When I brought in DJ Jubilee, so people could see like a bounce icon in the city of New Orleans, but he was also a great community leader. Like his work in the community is like unparalleled. I have a lot of respect for him as a community leader. The other bands I brought in, the Second Line Band, the Mardi Gras Indians, a Zydeco band. Like, I brought you what I thought was the best of like Louisiana culture, but then I also brought you what the best of food was. For people who never been to New Orleans, I wanted you to see New Orleans, but I also wanted you to see that cow. And then I think the thing that probably that whole weekend, besides the whole cow significance to me and giving out awards to people who I thought deserved the work, and you was one, Therese. People probably say, like, Howard, why are you giving out awards? And some people are like, you might deserve awards. I don't care about awards. I mean, like, that's personally, I do not care. I think people need to give awards. People need to get awards, and my blessings gonna come to me. I'm good. Right. But hearing from Miss Leah Chase, I thought that was like, I needed the community to hear from her, and I knew she wasn't traveling anymore.
Right.
But I wanted, since I knew she wasn't traveling anymore, I didn't want her to have an excuse by not coming. So I said, we're gonna go into the space, and we're gonna put money into the space, and let her come and talk to us, and without any mainstream media attention. And I blocked out PBS from coming to that. I didn't tell them. They probably would have loved to be in there, but I didn't want that conversation to go widespread. Besides Paul Grant, he had shared the conversation. I kind of made a thing was I wanted people to write about Gumbo Jubilee, but I didn't want a whole lot of stuff coming out about what it was, and people just capitalized on Gumbo Jubilee, and because I didn't have no sponsors. I mean, the sponsorship really was just the community, my family, and myself.
Right.
That real talk. That was really the sponsorships. I mean, I paid all the venues. I paid all the entertainers, all the acts, all the food costs. But like my family, my father did a heroic effort making that pit for us. I mean, I looked at the budget item on that, and it's just
you can't even calculate. I mean, you can calculate, but the amount of like
if I had to calculate how much that thing, the intellectual property, if I had to put a dollar value on Gumbo Jubilee, that was probably almost a $70,000 or $80,000 event. Easily, yeah. And no sponsors, and so.
Well, that was why I wanted you to sort of talk about that part, because it did feel very much like that unboard, unbothered, like very fully owned, like full agency was such a big part of the lesson of that weekend. Also, I think, and one of the reasons I wanted you to talk about the significance of the whole cow was that it also felt like it's like this moment of like reclamation in terms of our generation's claim or sort of um, our claim to stewardship in a way that was really interesting. I think sometimes we think about the function of media and the function of our place in it and the stories that we tell as, I mean, those stories have to be more than just our own byline, our own ego, or just sort of reclaiming your own personal story. A lot of it, in a lot of ways, is like the unfulfilled prophecy, right? There's a lot of ways in which we navigate in modern context that is we have a lot more latitude. As much as we talk about the limits of media spaces, we have a lot more latitude than even our mothers and sort of the generation behind us had to tell stories. And so it just felt this really particularly poetic period to put, or sort of mark to make about the pit masters who wouldn't have been able to consume it. And then we were in this space. I mean, it was a mix of people, writers, chefs, historians, all this mix of people in this room, but all these Black people who cook and do this work, and not necessarily everybody who was in that room was good people, but just sometimes it gets very superficial in media spaces. And it was such a clarifying moment about why we do this work and what we have, like heritage-wise. It was this sort of beautiful ballet of all of the points of heritage we could all be drawing from if we only paid more attention, if we only thought about the stewardship that charge on our lives, right? Like it doesn't necessarily define how you tell stories, but should certainly be part of, it should be in the air of how you engage our history in storytelling. So it's really, I don't know, it felt very clarifying in that way. I don't know, I don't know. Sometimes I think,
I think I wanted you all to, I want people to understand, think the other thing I wanted people to understand is like, if me personally, the community and family could put something on like that, if we came together, because I made a theme that year, we're better together.
Yes.
If we came together and leverage our power, mainstream would have to come to us. Like, I don't think we're not there yet. I hope like more meaningful conversations come, and not just conversations, we need actions.
Yes.
And sometimes we may have to make a stand and say, yo, we're not going to this event this year. Like, y'all really not really honoring our contributions. Like, I don't want to be the second invitee. I want to be the first invitee.
Right.
And that was my thing. I want y'all to know what it feels like to be number one on the table instead of number two. And
you said so. I mean, that point about like making your presence conditional when you enter spaces is another part, right? Like sometimes I think we get so glamored by any kind of access or any kind of attention, and don't really think about what the conditions of that presence is. And so I don't know, something about the way you talked about ownership of me. I still remember the taste of your parents' sweet potatoes. I still remember how particularly curated people like Linda Green. Chefs that were coming from all over the country who had a little piece of their story imprinted on that on the meal, but just the sense that you curated a night that was really about everybody sort of having room and breath to put shoulders down and just sort of be in community, and it's a really particular way of operating.
I think I'm gonna end it with like this. My uncle kind of said something. When people left the farm, left this land, they left their community, the sense of community. I never left the community because I never left the land totally. I mean, we weren't farmers like they were, but when people went into the, I guess you would say, concrete jungles, it's a little different. The sense of place is not there.
Yes.
I got to think about how he said it earlier today, but it just was kind of beautiful how he said, like, we lost community, and I wanted to show people what is community. And as community going forward, I want to show through barbecue what is community. I think barbecue is an excellent tool to explain community. Yep. Even though when it first was formed on the American soils, it was not a great place for African Americans at all. It was pain and torture, but it was still one of those things that transcend, and that everything in America's history, that little barbecue pit in the ground somehow showed up. It was quintessential. So I believe that same as racism or white supremacy ends, that same meat or dish or whatever could be right there on the other side of the celebration table. And so when I look one day to hope to bring Gumbo Jubilee back as an actual event. It can't do it right now because we're in the midst of COVID or whatever. But like one day I would love to see Gumbo Jubilee almost like a Coachella or Bonnaroo of some sort, where we're giving out awards, we're having musical acts, we're drinking beverages, we're cooking barbecue, we're cooking all kind of other foods, cooking family sweet potatoes, maybe having a fried fish dinner tonight, like that Friday. Looks like
this without fried fish.
The fried fish, just in an old cast iron pot, so people can see what that's all about. Yeah. So since people like cooking cast iron, but they have it in a cast iron pot, I think it'd be something special to be able to witness a Gumbo Jubilee event like that, where you have a 2-day or 1-day like event, just kind of like with awards and the concert series, but just like the day before. It could be verticals where we're doing retreats, where we bring a small subset of people down south, and y'all kind of just get to spend the time just to see what my mind is thinking about, or how I facilitate when I go back home, what I'm thinking about, what I want to go see, how it makes me comfort. But I want to see the economy. I want to see how you develop economies. I mean, that's at the end of the day. I'm not trying to be wealthy, but I want to see how to, because as you build economies, with education, you improve healthcare, you improve human life. Everything is kind of the housing. If you increase the economies, you improve housing, you improve how people live their lives, you improve healthcare. Also, kids where I come from, a lot of us who have left, a lot of us who graduated from there never came back because we didn't have anything to go back to. So I'm working on a project now where I'm trying to build something back there to be a manufacturing facility of some sort. Because you have to, I see other people come to America to come out the American dream, but they always sending money back home to their countries. And so I took the parallel. Well, I said, well, can I do that to my home community? And people say we should help Africa out too, but I got to help the South for African Americans is our home. We've been for 400 years.
That's right.
I mean, you got to kind of see the South before you see Africa. If you can't see, if you can't see the American South, you're not going to see Africa. You got to find the South in Africa. You got to find Africa in the South before you even go to Africa. It's a beautiful place. It's a beautiful experience, but you really need to kind of understand the South before you go over there.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like that's a really beautiful place to stop. I don't know. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, but I mean, I think the thing that you take a lot of interviews, and so you have been doing these really beautiful series of your own research. And something I always wanted to talk to you about and really kind of get archived is just your origin story, because I think it just tells so much about how you do your work, and it's incredible. And it's something
Thank
I think.
You. I appreciate it. I mean, I'm humble. You said my work is incredible. You're probably one of the first people who told me, because sometimes I didn't necessarily want to keep doing some of the work I do. I just like whatever. But you were one of the people.
It's necessary, Howard. I mean, I can appreciate that it's hard. I can appreciate that in a lot of ways what you're doing is singular. I mean, I don't know that anybody else is thinking about the significance of barbecue culture in the way that you are. And I also think that in the world of culinary history, it's still a sort of subset that is evolving. And I think even in academic spaces, people aren't really thinking as critically about the power of Black culture in that narrative. And so what you're doing is really sort of giving folks a lot of best practices and a lot of tools to sort of think about and dictate how this work is going to look going forward. So it's really beautiful to watch, Howard, and I'm so impressed by and inspired by.
Yeah, it was shocking. One of our chef friends from home told me this chef Adrienne, I forgot her, she's from New York somewhere. Oh, well, she lives in New York now. What's her last name?
Adrienne Cheatham.
Yeah. And I was like, she said, my friend said she tagged on Instagram like one of the 5 people she wanted to cook with. I was like, why y'all want to come cook barbecue with me? But I guess people want to see what it is. They want to kind of understand that deeper sense of it. And so like, I will, if she want to come down south one of these days when COVID is cleared and she want to cook, as long as she makes some sides, I mean, we could figure that part out. But
that's right. She's very good people, and her practice is really beautiful. And she's someone also who, when you talk about the people who you think about, who are really thinking about how you take history and heritage with you in your modern practice, she's certainly one of those people. So you would really like her a lot.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know about the chef world and all that kind of stuff, but I know I knew what we ate growing up. I knew what farm to table was. I knew everything else about it. I know the foundations, and I think like when you got good products, you can make magical things happen. Like my family sweet potatoes, and that's a whole crazy another story. But
oh my gosh,
we're gonna talk about. I think I got a video. I think I got an audio recorder of my father. I think I'm gonna share that somehow.
Please, we want it. I need it in my life. Those sweet potatoes are some of the most beautifully floral and gorgeously textured potatoes I've ever tasted. It's something really.
I think the story is even better than the sweet potatoes. When y'all hear the story,
can't wait.
When y'all hear the story,
I need this in my life.
I'm gonna just tell you, you never know what you have. My father gave an older man car tires, and that's how he ended up those sweet potato seeds.
Wow, on just a trade.
The man couldn't base. Y'all have to wait to hear it from my father's voice.
Yeah.
But it was basically like something about some car tires.
Wow, beautiful. And how long?
That's culture.
Old, how many years have y'all been cultivating that particular sweet potato?
Probably 35. So my father's 68. Probably maybe 40.
Jeez.
It might be 40 something years.
Right.
Those.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Yeah, can't wait for it. We need the date drops on those, but yeah, it's that, Howard. It's that you have these gems, these like pearls that help us to intuit and sort of make these deductions that can extrapolate out larger things. We need the raw data, and these stories that you are able to tell because you are so rooted are critical. It's beautiful. So just thank you for doing the work you do. As hard as it gets, and as much as it's a dual life to the work you do at NASA, it's really beautiful and it's really impactful. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
You are very necessary to this world.
I mean, it's a lot of work though. I enjoy it though. It's therapeutic. It's very. The next projects, I'm excited about the next projects, and like the WPA narratives, I want to be redone.
Yes.
Not redone, but I want to do a small project. The spirit of it, I want it to be. We need to capture the last people who has a real recollection of that kind of life.
Yes.
And I want to create something. That may not be it may just be in Clarendon County for me, but or Clarendon, Williamsburg, or whatever, or Nichols. But I want to do that part.
There is something I'm sort of thinking this on the same lines. I think that is really interesting to think about that in this moment when everybody is relatively still for a minute, but also just not so much putting it all on one person, right? Like just deputizing everyone to sort of think about what stories are hidden in plain sight where you are, or who's in your family. Because I mean, there's so much we discount in terms of who has the stories in this. I mean, the power of the WPN narratives, in my opinion, was that you caught people at this really perfect moment age-wise. Like you were able to get enough stories from folks who, in terms of age, were still ripe enough and still sort of had these memories close enough to be able to tell. A friend of mine is working on a narrative around the stories of desegregation, the children of desegregation, and sort of getting their stories told now, because to your point, like, you know, life is not promised. And some of these stories are really interesting because a lot of them are talking about how they felt. Some of them felt forfeited to the movement in a lot of ways, right? We don't think about the emotional trauma. We don't think about the what that does to a child's psyche to sort of be confronted with that kind of hatred and that kind of like, and how we arm children with that sort of. So anyway, that part of narrative she's finding really interesting in terms of how people are telling their stories and the language folks have. Think about it, right? My grandparents, your parents, like, do you really have the language to be able to digest what that memory is really? And so I'm wondering, because it's something you said earlier about how you engage people with telling their stories. It's kind of like you wonder sometimes this preciousness about how we're going to go forward with these oral histories, right? You have to kind of be precious enough and sort of respectful enough to be able to help guide people through parts of their narrative that they might not even thought about, they don't even consider on a daily basis. Digging back into all of that past is a lot, but it could be really beautiful. I think it would be beautiful. We will talk later, but yeah, this is something
we'll talk later about that. But no, I appreciate Therese again. I'm glad we got this done.
Yes.
Ooh, can't wait for the next couple of weeks. I'm so excited.
Yeah,
America is not ready.
They are not.
I'm gonna leave it like that.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Have a good day, rest of this evening. Thanks again, Therese. I really appreciate it. And we'll figure out how to share this.
Yes.
Okay.